The night the Seraphine Grand threw Zara out, it had no idea it had just declared war. She didn't see the door coming. One second she was standing at the front desk, her voice calm, her request reasonable. The next, a hand thick-fingered, impersonal, the hand of a man who had never once considered that he might be making the worst mistake of his professional life, closed around her upper arm and steered her toward the exit with the casual efficiency of someone disposing of an inconvenience. The glass door swung open. The cold hit her like a slap. And then the door shut behind her with a sound she would never forget. A clean, final click. Like a verdict. Zara stood on the pavement and did not move. Around her, the city continued its indifferent business. Taxis hissed through puddles. A couple laughed somewhere to her left. The doorman, who had watched the whole thing from his post without blinking, stared straight ahead as though she had already ceased to exist. She could feel the phantom pressure of the security guard's grip still burning on her arm, and beneath the cold, beneath the shock, something else was rising. Something hot and quiet and dangerous. She looked down at her coat. Beige. Simple. Perfectly pressed. She had chosen it deliberately tonight, the same way she had chosen the dark green dress underneath it, the flat shoes, the natural hair pinned back with nothing expensive. She had wanted to be invisible. She had wanted to walk through the doors of the Seraphine Grand as nobody, just a woman, just a Tuesday night, just a standard room booking, and see what the hotel did when the owner wasn't watching. Now she had her answer. The Seraphine Grand had looked at Zara Lee, seen a young black woman in a plain coat with no reservation and no recognizable name, and decided she didn't belong. The night manager had been almost elegant about it, the way truly practiced cruelty always is. A smile with no warmth in it. A policy that didn't exist. A suggestion, delivered with the precision of a blade slipped between ribs, that perhaps Zara would be more comfortable somewhere more suitable. Zara pressed her lips together and exhaled slowly. The air tasted of exhaust and winter. Her name was on the deed of this building. Not his. Hers. She had stood in a lawyer's office 4 weeks ago, her hand steady as she signed her name across the bottom of the ownership documents, and Kang Jiwoo had stood beside her in one of his dark suits and said nothing because he never needed to say much. He had simply handed her the pen. A gift, he'd told her afterward. She had thought, a responsibility. She had thought, a test. She had not imagined it would be this kind of test. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket. Her fingers found his name without looking. She didn't scroll, it was always at the top, always the first thing her thumb moved toward, as if her body had decided that regardless of what her mind said, this was the person the situation required. Lee Kang Jiwoo. No title. No description. Just his name, the way you'd label something that didn't need explanation. Like fire. Like gravity. She stared at it. Calling him meant pulling a pin from a grenade. She understood this clearly. He was not a man who received bad news and processed it the way ordinary men did, with frustration, with noise, with the theatrical performance of anger. He was quiet. He was still. He moved through the world with a deliberateness that made other powerful men look frantic by comparison, and when something came to his attention that shouldn't have happened, it didn't simply get corrected. It got erased. Surgically. Permanently. The kind of erasure that left no scar because it left no trace at all. Zara knew what she was holding in her hand. She knew what pressing that button would cost these people, the manager with the cold smile, the security guards with their impersonal hands, everyone who had stood in that lobby and watched and done nothing. She pressed call. He answered before the second ring finished. There was no greeting. There never was. Just his voice, low and familiar, with that particular quality she had never heard in anyone else's voice, the quality of absolute certainty. As though by answering the phone he had already assessed the situation and was simply waiting for the details. Zara. He said her name the way other people said words they meant to keep. Not a question. Not a greeting. A statement. A claim. I'm at the hotel, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, and she was briefly grateful for that. A pause. She heard the faint sound of paper somewhere on his end. The distant, Muffled hum of the city coming through glass, his window, 40 floors above the world, the city spread beneath him like something he owned, because largely, he did. Is something wrong? They wouldn't give me a room. She didn't elaborate. She didn't explain the manager's smile, the fabricated policy, the hand on her arm. She had learned, in the 14 months since she had walked into Kong Jiwoo's world and somehow stayed, that with him, the shape of a thing was enough. He filled in the rest himself, and he always filled it incorrectly. The silence that followed was not empty. It had texture to it, weight. She could feel, through the phone, through the distance between them, the exact moment something shifted in him. Like a vast piece of machinery changing direction. Like weather turning. Where are you? Outside. On the street. Don't move. His voice had dropped half a register. She knew that sound. She had heard it twice before, and both times, the night that followed had changed the shape of something permanently. That is not a request. I'm on my way. The line went dead. Zara lowered the phone and stood on the edge of the curb. The wind moved through her hair, and she didn't bother to push it back. She just stood there and waited, and she thought about what she had just set in motion, and she felt the first cold tremor of something that wasn't quite fear, but lived in the same neighborhood. It took 6 minutes. She knew because she counted. Not deliberately, her mind was not calm enough for deliberate counting, but she registered the minutes the way you register the distance of a storm by the gap between lightning and thunder. 1, 2, 3. The doorman shifted on his feet. 4. A taxi blew its horn 2 blocks east. 5. The night manager appeared briefly behind the lobby glass, her severe blonde bob turning toward the street for a moment before she disappeared back into the warmth. 6. A car turned the corner. It was a long black sedan, and it moved through the city the way a knife moves through water, without resistance, without sound, without the kind of apology that other cars make simply by existing in traffic. It pulled to the curb directly in front of Zara, and the doorman, the same doorman who had watched her be escorted out 20 minutes ago without so much as blinking, scrambled forward with a speed that would have been almost comical if Zara were in any mood to find things comical. The rear door opened from the inside. Kong Jiwoo stepped out. He was wearing a suit the color of midnight, and he wore it the way he wore everything, like the clothing had been designed around his stillness, his deliberateness, the particular quality of his presence that made the air around him feel denser. He was not a large man in the way that people think of when they think of power. He was lean, precise, economical in the way that truly dangerous things are economical. No wasted movement. No wasted word. His dark eyes found hers the moment he cleared the door, and for a single suspended second, the entire city, the horns, the cold, the strangers moving around them, became background noise. There was only him. He did not look angry. This was the thing about Jiwoo that had taken her the longest to understand. He never looked angry when it mattered most. He looked the way a very calm sea looks in the hour before a storm arrives, and anyone who had ever been on the water knew that this was not reassurance. This was warning. He crossed the pavement to her in measured steps, his leather shoes making no sound, and stopped close enough that she could see the slight tension along his jaw. His eyes moved over her face, down to her shoulders, to her arm, the arm the security guard had gripped. Something passed through his expression. Ice first, then something hotter beneath it, and then nothing. Blank and controlled and terrifying in its blankness. Are you hurt? His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't soft at all. Just my pride, Zara said. His jaw tightened once. Then his hand came up, and his gloved fingers found the strand of hair the wind had pulled across her cheek, and he tucked it back behind her ear with a gentleness that was almost violent in its contrast to everything else about him. He let his hand fall. That, he said, each word placed with care, is unacceptable. He offered her his arm. She took it, and together they walked back toward the glass doors of the hotel she owned. The doorman pulled the door open so fast he nearly stumbled over himself. Zara didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead, her hand resting in the crook of Jiwoo's elbow, the fine fabric of his suit impossibly smooth beneath her fingers, the muscle beneath it like iron wrapped in silk. The lobby changed the moment they crossed the threshold. It was subtle at first, a faltering in the low hum of conversation, a head or two turning near the front desk. Then it spread, the way a current spreads through water, until the entire room had shifted its attention toward the man walking through the center of it with a calm that felt like the eye of something catastrophic. The air thickened. The temperature somehow dropped. Jiwoo walked without hurrying, without looking at anyone in particular, which was exactly what made everyone look at him. He moved toward the center of the lobby and stopped at the large marble compass rose inlaid into the floor, the room's centerpiece, the architectural heart of the Seraphine Grand, and stood there and waited and let everyone come to him. Because they always did. The night manager emerged from the office behind the front desk. She had arranged her face into its professional welcome, the practiced warmth she reserved for the right kind of clientele, men in expensive suits, women with the right kind of shoes, people who looked like they belonged in the places they stood. She opened her mouth. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Seraphine Grand. How may I?" Her voice stopped. Her eyes had found Zara. Zara watched the woman's face do something extraordinarily revealing. The professional mask didn't fall so much as crack along very precise fault lines. Confusion first, then recognition. Not of Zara herself, but of what Zara's presence beside this man meant, and the calculation her face was trying to make was failing completely, the numbers refusing to add up to anything that made sense. Jiwoo did not acknowledge the manager. He continued to stand at the center of the compass rose, surveying the lobby the way a man surveys territory, and his gaze moved across the room until it found the two security guards near the elevator bank. They saw him. They saw Zara. Their expressions cycled through bored professionalism, confusion, and then something Zara could only describe as existential dread, all within the span of about 3 seconds. "You," Jiwoo said. His voice was not raised. He didn't need to raise it. The word cut through the lobby's ambient noise the way a stone cuts through the surface of a lake, clean, without effort, and with ripples that went on much longer than you expected. He was looking at the manager. The woman took one careful step forward. "Yes, sir." This woman, Jiwoo said, and his free hand moved to the small of Zara's back, settling there with a weight that was both proprietary and protective, attempted to book a room here tonight. The manager's mouth opened. "Yes, sir," she did, "but our policy." "You will be quiet now." The words landed in the room like something physical. The manager's mouth closed. The color in her face shifted, cycling toward something ashen. Around them, Zara was aware of the lobby staff, front desk clerks, a bellhop near the entrance, 2 concierge staff, all of them very still, very attentive, performing the particular frozen alertness of people who understand that they are witnessing something they want no part of but cannot look away from. Jiwoo turned his head and his eyes found Zara's, and in the midst of all of it, the watching lobby, the terrified manager, the weight of everything that was about to happen, his focus on her was absolute and quiet, as though there were still, somewhere underneath all of this, just the two of them. He leaned in. His lips nearly brushed her ear. His voice was barely a breath, meant only for her, threaded with cedar and smoke, and something beneath both that she had never found a name for. "What would you like me to do, Zara?" She felt the question land in the center of her chest. He was handing her something. She understood this. He was placing the sword in her hand and stepping back, and whatever she said next would become reality before the night was over. This was how his world worked. This was the currency it ran on. She could say, "Let it go." She could say, "Take me upstairs." She could choose mercy, and he would accept that choice, and they would leave these people to the lives they would have continued living if they had simply done their jobs. The memory of the manager's smile moved through her. The particular cruelty of it, not loud, not dramatic, just smooth and practiced and certain. The smile of someone who had made the same calculation 100 times and had never once been wrong. Until tonight. Zara straightened. "Show them who I am," she said quietly. Her voice did not waver. Something moved at the corner of Jiwoo's mouth. Not quite a smile. Something quieter and more precise than a smile. He straightened beside her, his hand still warm against the small of her back, and turned his attention back to the frozen room. My wife, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the marble expanse, was treated with disrespect. He paused for exactly long enough to let the words settle. In my hotel. The silence in the lobby was the kind that has texture. Zara could feel people reassessing the rapid, desperate recalculation happening behind 20 pairs of eyes, the same question moving through every mind in the room. Who is she? Jiwoo looked at the manager. I find myself curious about the standards of this establishment. The level of service. The quality of judgment being exercised by its management. He let that sit for a moment. Bring me the security footage from the front desk for the past hour, and the employee files for every member of staff currently on duty. The manager's mouth opened. Sir, I assure you this was a simple misunderstanding. There's no need to. It was a failure, Jiwoo said. Failures in my empire carry consequences. That is not a warning. It is a fact of how things work. He turned his head slightly. We will wait. He guided Zara to a pair of armchairs in a quiet corner of the lobby, his hand never leaving her back until she was seated. Then he sat beside her, unhurried, and picked up a financial magazine from the side table and began to turn pages with the serene, slightly bored expression of a man waiting for a meeting that was running a few minutes behind schedule. Around them, the lobby fell into barely controlled chaos. Phones were answered in hushed, urgent tones. The manager was at the front desk, her composure in pieces, speaking rapidly to a subordinate. The two security guards stood near the wall with the posture of men preparing to receive a sentence they already knew wasn't going to be good. Zara watched them. She watched the fear on their faces, and she felt the strangeness of it, the way power felt when you were on the inside of it for the first time, looking out. It was not the clean vindication she had expected. It was heavier than that. More complicated. She thought, I crossed something tonight. And then she thought, I can't uncross it. They chose their actions, Jiwoo said, without looking up from the magazine. His voice was barely above a murmur, meant only for her. You did not choose them for these people. They arrived here on their own. I made the call, Zara said. You did. He turned a page. You defended your dignity and mine. There is nothing in that requiring apology. She looked at her hands. Exhaled. 20 minutes passed. Then a junior manager approached with a tablet, moving the way people move when they are carrying something they already know contains bad news. The senior manager followed 2 steps behind, her earlier arrogance entirely gone, replaced by something transparent and desperate that Zara recognized as pure survival instinct. Jiwoo set the magazine down and took the tablet. He didn't look at the footage. He went directly to the employee files, swiped through them with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for, and stopped. He tilted the screen toward Zara. She leaned forward. Her eyes found the name on the file, the employment history, the listed previous employer, a holding company with a clean, forgettable name. A name that meant nothing to most people. But Zara had been Jiwoo's wife for over a year, and she had spent that year paying attention, learning the architecture of the world she had entered, and she knew this name. She had heard it mentioned in a conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear, in the same breath as another name. A family name. Choi. The Choi family. Jiwoo's most enduring problem. His most persistent enemy. She looked up at him. His profile was unreadable, it was always unreadable, but she saw the barely perceptible tightening along his jawline, and she felt the temperature of the air around him change the way air changes before lightning. Get every employee in this building, he said to the junior manager, his voice flat and cold and completely without inflection. Every single one. The lobby. Now. The young man left at something close to a run. Within minutes, the lobby was full. Bellhops, concierge staff, front desk clerks, kitchen workers still in their checkered trousers and white coats, housekeeping staff in their uniforms. They filed in and arranged themselves in a loose, uneasy crowd, and the quiet that fell over them was the quiet of people who understood, instinctively, that they were standing in the middle of something much larger than a shift at work. Jiwoo rose. Zara rose with him. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her in close to his side, and she felt the solidity of him, the absolute, unshakable certainty that lived in his posture, his silence, his stillness, and she let herself lean into it slightly, and lifted her chin, and met the eyes of the crowd looking back at her. She did not flinch. For those of you who may not know, Jiwoo said, his voice clear and calm and carrying to every corner of the room, "This is Zara Lee. She is my wife. She is also the owner of this hotel. Her name is on the deed. This establishment belongs to her." The intake of breath that moved through the crowd was collective and unguarded. She watched the shock move across face after face, genuine shock, the kind that can't be performed, and she held herself still and let them look. Let them recalculate. Let the full weight of what had happened tonight land on every person in that room. The manager had gone completely white. The hand she'd raised toward Jiwoo fell back to her side. She looked at Zara with something moving through her expression that cycled rapidly between horror and desperation before settling, finally, into a kind of freefall. "Mrs. Lee." Her voice was barely intact. She took one stumbling step forward. "Mrs. Lee, I had no idea. This was a terrible misunderstanding. Please, I am so sorry. She was looking at Zara, not at Jiwoo. She had calculated, correctly, that Zara was the variable that hadn't been accounted for, and that the only way through this was through her. Through whatever mercy she could find in the woman she had dismissed with a cold smile 2 hours ago. For a moment, one genuine, human moment, Zara felt something close to pity. The woman in front of her was afraid in the way that people are afraid when they understand, finally and completely, that they have made an irreversible error. It was not a comfortable thing to look at. But then she remembered. Not just the smile, not just the fabricated policy. She remembered the hold company name on the file. She remembered what Jiwoo had said. Deliberate. Provocation. A test. This woman had not simply been rude. She had been placed here, weaponized, pointed at Zara like a message sent across enemy lines. Her cruelty tonight had not been casual. It had been intentional. Zara said nothing. She simply looked at the woman. Her face was still. Her hands were still. Her eyes held steady, and she let the silence do what words never could. She let it fill the space between them completely, let the apology rise into it and find no purchase there, let it wither in the air and fall. The manager's last reserve of hope drained visibly from her face, and Zara felt, in that moment, the full, cold weight of the power she had stepped into. It was not comfortable. But it was hers. Jiwoo gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he addressed the room. "The night manager," he said, "and the 2 security officers who were on duty at the front entrance this evening. You are dismissed. Collect your belongings and vacate this property in 10 minutes. You will be escorted." He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. 2 men in dark suits materialized from somewhere near the entrance, his men, not the hotel's, and moved toward the 3 condemned employees with the quiet efficiency of people for whom this was a very ordinary kind of Tuesday. "The rest of you," Jiwoo continued, "have a choice. You may remain in the employ of Mrs. Lee and conduct yourselves with the professionalism and respect that her position requires. Or you may leave with them. You have a moment to decide." No one moved. No one breathed. "Good," he said. "That will be all." He turned, arm around Zara's shoulders, and walked toward the private elevator at the far end of the lobby. The assembled staff parted around them in complete silence, and Zara walked through the center of it with her chin level and her eyes forward, and she thought, "This is what it feels like. This. Right here. This is the weight of it." The elevator doors slid shut. Zara exhaled. The suite upstairs was vast and quiet, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city's glittering sprawl, 1,000 lights, 1,000 lives, all of them completely unaware that anything had shifted tonight. She walked to the window and crossed her arms over herself and let the adrenaline begin its slow recession, leaving behind a hollow, trembling feeling she hadn't expected. "That was a great deal to carry," she said quietly, mostly to the glass. She heard him move behind her. Felt him come to stand at her back, close enough that his warmth reached her, his presence a solid anchor in the enormous, quiet room. "They required a lesson," he said. "Some people do not absorb information gently. I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I just didn't expect it to feel like that." "Like what?" She thought about it. Heavy, she finally said. I expected it to feel like justice. It felt more like gravity. A pause. Then, very quietly, that is because it is not a performance for you. You are not a woman who enjoys other people's suffering. That is not a weakness, Zara. It is the reason I trust you with things I trust no one else with. She leaned back against him. His arms came around her, and they stood like that for a long time, watching the city below, and for a few minutes the night was almost simple again. Then his phone buzzed. She felt him go still first, that particular stillness that was different from his normal stillness, the one with an edge to it. He answered, stepping back slightly, and his voice shifted into clipped, sparse responses that she had learned to track the way you track weather systems. Yes. When? Where are they now? A pause. Understood. He ended the call. Zara turned. His expression had changed. The quiet satisfaction was gone. In its place was something colder and more focused, the look of a man who has received information and is already, in the space of seconds, building a response to it. Jiwoo. That was not a simple act of disrespect tonight, he said. His eyes met hers. Albright worked for the Choi family. They placed her here deliberately. Her treatment of you was a message, a provocation, designed to be visible, designed to provoke a response. They wanted to see how I would react to having my wife insulted in my own hotel. The floor seemed to dissolve under her. She had understood it intellectually when she saw the file, but hearing it spoken in plain language made something entirely different. They had used her. She was the instrument of a message she hadn't known she was carrying. She was a test. They were watching tonight, she said. Yes. Then they know you came. Yes. And they know what you did. Yes. Something moved through his eyes. They now know your name. Your face. What you mean to me. He said it without flinching, without the particular careful distance he sometimes deployed around the truth of what she was to him. It simply landed between them, plain and total. You are no longer invisible, Zara. I am sorry for that. I could not have done otherwise. She opened her mouth to tell him she understood, and then she heard it. A sharp crack from the hallway. A muffled shout cut off. Jiwoo moved in the same instant. She had never seen it before, not like this, the full, fluid speed of him, nothing economical about it now, just pure kinetic precision. He was in front of her before she fully processed that he had moved, his body between her and the door, and something dark and sleek was in his hand that she hadn't known he was carrying. The suite door burst open. Two men in black came through it fast and ugly, not Jiwoo's men. She could see that immediately, something clumsy in their urgency. The first one barely cleared the doorframe. Jiwoo fired twice, sounds suppressed to a dull mechanical cough, and the man dropped. The second man didn't come for Jiwoo. He came for Zara. There was no time. Jiwoo was occupied, a third figure in the doorway, collision of bodies, struggle. The man coming for her was large and fast, and he had already identified her as the weak point, the leverage. She was on her feet before the thought formed completely, her body running ahead of her mind, and her eyes swept the room for anything. The lamp. Heavy crystal, ridiculously ornate, sitting on the end table to her right. She grabbed it with both hands, spun with all the momentum she had, and swung it directly into the side of the man's knee as he lunged. The sound it made was sickening. The man's roar was immediate and total, pure animal surprise and pain. His leg buckled under him. His momentum turned catastrophic, and he went down hard, crashing through the glass coffee table in an explosion of crystal and steel frame that seemed to fill the entire suite with noise. And then silence. Zara stood with both hands still wrapped around the base of the lamp, breathing in ragged pulls, glass dust settling around her. Across the room, Jiwoo stood over the third man, weapon trained on the one she had taken down, who was on the floor among the wreckage of the table, clutching his knee, completely incapacitated. His own security team came through the door in a controlled flood, too late for the fight, but in time for the aftermath, and she watched them secure the intruders with the mechanical competence of people for whom violence is occupational. And she stood there in the center of the suite and let herself shake, just slightly, just once, and then she stopped. Ji-woo came to her in 3 long strides. His eyes were blazing, not with the controlled, weaponized cold she had seen downstairs, but with something raw and unguarded that she had only glimpsed in him before, and never quite like this. He reached for her face, both hands, his thumbs moving over her cheekbones. "Tell me you're not hurt." His voice was rough in a way she had never heard it. Rough with something he didn't have a word for, or wouldn't use one if he did. "I'm fine," she said. Her hands came up to his wrists. She could feel his pulse there, fast and unsteady, and she pressed her fingers against it and held on. He closed his eyes. Just for a second. When he opened them, the rawness was still there, but something else was settling over it, not the blankness, not the professional calm. Something she had never seen on his face before. Something that took her a moment to identify because she had not expected to find it there, in this man, on this night. It was respect. Deep and absolute and entirely unperformed. "I saw what you did," he said. Low, deliberate, each word carrying its full weight. "You did not hesitate." "I'm not a fighter," Zara said. "No," he agreed. "You are something more useful than a fighter." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are a survivor. And you are not afraid of this world." He paused. "Of my world. Our world," she said. Something shifted in his face. Quietly. Finally. Later, after the men had been removed and the broken glass swept away, after the security team had swept the hallway and confirmed the floor and Ji-woo had made 2 brief, devastating phone calls that she understood would have consequences she would not see but would definitely hear about eventually, they stood at the window again. The city below was oblivious. A galaxy of ordinary lights, ordinary lives, flowing on. She looked at their reflection in the dark glass and thought about the woman who had walked out of this hotel's lobby 2 hours ago, cold and humiliated on the curb. She barely recognized her. Not because she had changed, but because she had finally stopped pretending she hadn't already changed, months ago, quietly, without announcement. Ji-woo's arms were around her from behind. His chin rested on her shoulder. She felt the weight of him, the realness of him, the particular, complicated gravity of who he was and what he did and what that meant for the life she was now unambiguously living. His embrace was a fortress. She understood that clearly. It was also a cage. But it was a cage she had walked into with both eyes open, and tonight, for the first time, she had stood in it not as a guest, but as someone who belonged there. Someone who had earned the ground she was standing on. "They'll come back," she said. "The Choi family. This won't be the end of it." "No," he agreed. "It will not." "Then we need to be ready." She felt his arms tighten around her. A slight, deliberate pressure. A promise made without words, in the language he was most fluent in. "We will be," he said. She looked at their reflection. The woman in the green dress and the man in the dark suit, the city sprawling endlessly behind them, the night outside carrying the weight of everything that had just happened and everything that was still coming. She thought about the dead weight of that lobby full of watching eyes and how she had held herself still beneath it. She thought about the lamp in her hands and the sound it had made. She thought about the deed in a lawyer's office somewhere across town, her name at the bottom of it in her own handwriting. She had not been rescued tonight. She wanted to be clear about this, at least with herself. She had called the storm, and when it arrived, she had stood in the center of it with him. That was a different thing. That was the only version of this story she was willing to be the protagonist of. His grip tightened once more. Outside, the city hummed on in its beautiful, indifferent way, and inside the suite at the top of the Seraphine Grand, Zara Lee held onto her husband's wrists and looked at the 2 of them in the glass and felt, through the exhaustion and the adrenaline and the weight of the power she had finally, irrevocably claimed, something that settled in her chest like a key turning in a lock. She was home. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know this world is just getting started. There is so much more of Zara and Ji-woo to come, and the Choi family is far from finished. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single chapter of what happens next. Drop a comment below telling us what moment hit hardest for you tonight, and if someone in your life would be completely obsessed with this story, share it with them right now. We will see you in the next one.